Alright, I'm going to give this video making thing a shot, and so in this video we're just going to make some two-dimensional arrays a couple different ways and take a look at also some quick printing methods. So right off the bat, I want to make a 2D array of strings. So remember, this would have been the method, and my strings are going to be types of cats. This would have been the method to make a single dimension array, 1D array. But I don't want a 1D array, I want a two-dimensional array. And let's make this array have, let's go 2 rows and 4 columns. So how we're going to tell Java that we want 2 rows is we're going to put a 2 in the first box. That first box always represents rows. And then the second one represents columns. Just to get a quick look at what's happening here, let's go ahead and let's print out cats. And let's see if we get what we think. So if we go, we think right now we should get basically like an empty array. But instead, when I print out cats, I get this funky looking thing. And that is basically the simplest way to think about it is that since an array is a reference object, think about this as that pointer that we keep talking about in class, that this is kind of like the address. It's sort of the most basic way to think about that. So in our reading, we learned that, all right, this doesn't print what we want. So in our reading, we learned that there's a method. We can do arrays.toString cats. And with a regular array, that would turn our array into a printable string. But here, again, I get this funkiness. But think about it this way. We created a array with 2 different rows. Let's think about these then as maybe the addresses of each row. With a two-dimensional array, there's another method, yet another thing we got to remember, but deep2string allows me to turn a two-dimensional array into a printable string. And so when we see our printable string here, it's empty, and empty in Java for a string would be null. So now let's start adding some elements to it, and we're going to start with the real basic way of adding elements to an array, which is one at a time. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell this program that I would like to add, let's go tiger, and I want to add it to the element that's in the first row and the first column. Remember that Java starts counting with 0. So even though we know that there are 4 columns, Java is going to count 0, 1, 2, 3, not 1, 2, 3, 4. So that takes care of one of them, but I wanted to fill this. So notice how I'm keeping the 0 the same in this one because these are all in the same row. So tiger, lion, tabby, calico, again, and now I've got one row of my arrays filled with values. I'm going to copy this and run it again, and this time I'm going to change the row because we want the columns the way that they are, but I want this to be the second row. And just for the sake of time, let's just show that that's going to fill it. And we're good with that one. Another way I could do something like this is, let's say I wanted to do the same thing, but I wanted to do types of dogs. Now, if I did it the same way as before, I would have said new string, but I'm not going to do it that way. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to stick the elements into the array one row at a time. So this first brace, think of that as like the array in general. And if it was a single dimension array, I could just add in a list of dogs like lab and maybe poodle. And that would give me an array. But we're doing this as a two-dimensional array, so this now is only going to basically fill a row. So I need another set of these braces for the array, and then we will add the rows one at a time. So maybe now I have a cattle dog, I have a pointer, and let's go wolf, and it's kind of a dog, and sheepdog. All right. So now that array has values, and just like before, I'm going to print that array out. And we have filled our array. Notice how, remember in the reading, we talked about jagged arrays? This array has 2 rows, but each row has a different number of columns. So my first row had 2 columns, my second row had 4 columns. If we don't like that, actually, I'm sorry, 3, 1, 2, 3, yeah, 4 columns. So if I didn't like that and I wanted them to be consistent, maybe I could have done something like this. Run it again, and now I have 2 rows, 3 rows with 2 columns each. And so that's something that we can do. All right, lastly, let's say, I'm going to do this another way. Let's say we wanted to make a multiplication table. So multiplication table, that would probably be an array of ints. Times table, just like what we used to do when we learned our math back in the day. So we want to make this a new array of integers, and most of the times tables that I did growing up were 12 by 12, so I'm going to do that. Just to get kind of a look real quick, let's take a look at what's in that array ahead of time. Because when we did an array of strings, it was null null. But when we do an array of ints, it's just going to fill it with zeros. So now what I want to do is I'm going to show you another way we could fill an array. And this is a more complicated approach, and probably one that if you wanted to systematically fill your array. And we're going to do that with nested loops. So with this first loop, what I'm going to do, and I'm naming my stuff the way we like to teach it in class. I'm keeping track of the row numbers with this variable, so I'm going to name it row. And I want row to be less than times table.length. Remember that with an array, we don't need parentheses after that. And this loop will traverse the rows. Next loop is going to be extremely similar. I want to traverse the columns though, so I'm going to name my variable something to do with columns. And then the other big difference here is when I'm doing column lengths, or the number of columns, it's not just dot length, but I have to put this brace in and row, and that's going to, for just that one row, test how many columns are in there. And now to make my times table, then I can just set, let's see here, some braces. I can just say that times table row column equal to row plus 1, because remember they start with 0, but we don't want to start with 0, we want to start with 1, and column plus 1. Now let's run that again. Looks like I only got about 30 seconds here. So now this for loop goes through each row one at a time, and then each column, so the column in the row, and fills it up with the different elements. So that's all for this time. Potentially another video coming later today, but for my first go,